thank you everybody for coming along. We are from Spark, which is the digital strategic design part of BGSS, which is a large tech consulting company. We're 70 strong, and there are 7 of us here today, well, approximately 70 strong. We're quite happy at the moment. It's hard to keep account of everything. And we thought we'd try and do something a little bit different rather than just give a formal talk. So, and we definitely knew that we wanted to do something to express our love for .gov, because we all have worked on it in various guises. We've all enjoyed it, and we actually often carry it over into the private sector work, possibly without changing some of the language slightly, but certainly the spirit of it we use often because it's, in our view, a really well-honed methodology. So this is us. My name is Rob Van Tol. I'm a service designer, and my memorable experience was folding myself into the back of a Fiat 500 in order to observe a driving test examiner do their work. Rebecca.
Hi everyone, so I'm Rebecca, so I'm the user researcher, and believe it or not, I've spent probably over about 300 hours in doctors' surgeries, not sick, waiting to speak to pharmacists and GPs and receptionists and patients about the NHS app, which was fab.
Yes. Russell.
Hi guys, I'm Russ. I'm a product designer or an interaction designer in the GDS parlance. I make a lot of prototypes, and in each of them I've always used the cast and characters of great movie RoboCop, because they have really dull sounding plain names like Clarence Boddicker. There you go. More on that later.
Hello, I'm Leonie Collier, and I'm actually a content designer, service designer, and user researcher. So I have many guises, and I've done all of those across gov.uk. One of my most memorable moments was actually doing some usability testing, booking a ferry between Dover and Calais to speak to foreign lorry drivers for part of the DVSA's project to improve the way it manages sort of roadside payments for people who are committing offences on the roads.
And Max.
Hello, so I'm Max. We put me in as a design strategist because I operate a bit on the edges of service design and user research when it starts feeding in between how .gov and the projects that work on that in like GDS, how they come together with service owner roles and policy people to give them that support and make sure that from a design strategy or a strategic perspective, what we're building and the way we're building it or thinking about it is right. And my particularly favorite memory of working on a .gov project is when we were regulating drones, and I went down and saw some drone races, but they move so fast that you have to wear slow motion goggles, more or less, to actually see them moving, which was great. Definitely a good way to spend a day.
Thanks, guys. And what I love about this slide is we could have written this all over again with different experiences as we do deep dives into people's working lives and the impact that that has on patients and the public. What we're going to do is try and capture some of the questions that you may have. We have a starter that we'd like you to vote on, and we're going to chat about these just for about 5 minutes each, trying to keep it light and informal. We haven't rehearsed this. Well, we've practiced it, but we haven't rehearsed it. It's slightly different. And allow you to pop up with any of the questions that you may want to ask us, because we encompass the full range of skills that GDS wants to employ on project. So that's the format. Here's our starting questions. So in our little practice, we asked the rest of the hive mind of Spark what their questions were, and they came up, well, they came up with a lot actually, which we filtered down to these 10. So I'm going to open up the polling, and we'd like you to look through these questions. It's multiple choice. You get 4 votes, and see which ones you'd like us to address first. So off you go, whilst I just set the timer. Oh, apparently you have to press the button called launch polling. Off you go. It's like share in Zoom. You know, you press share and then nothing happens and you have to press share again.
Rob, do we get a vote?
Yeah, you can get, of course you can.
I like that.
Cheers, mate.
I like that. I don't know if, can we vote?
We don't think we can.
No, I don't think we can. We can't mark our own homework.
Oh no. The some reason in presentation mode the timer doesn't work. So someone gives me a nudge when 2 minutes is done.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
We needed to have plants in the audience. Vote for the easy questions, the softballs.
Oh, look at this. I
That's
like it.
fascinating.
I love seeing real-time voting. It's great.
Oh yeah. It's like one of those chasing graphs where the bars move across and then up and down again.
Yeah. Yeah, some good questions there, though. Some really good questions to start with.
So I hope that also prompts your own questions. There's a, down in the controls here, there's a Q&A button, and that's where you can enter in your own questions. The timer doesn't work, but the actual poll has a timer against it.
Oh, yeah.
It does, and it's on 1:38, 39,
Yeah.
and 40. So
20 seconds left, people.
Do.
We have a clear winner at the moment.
Better start thinking about how we're going to answer it.
Yeah. And who? I think I'll just default to Max. You can just always be the first person.
I don't know what I did to deserve that.
Okay. There's no specific colouring in questions here, so I think I'm safe.
Okay, I'm going to end the polling there. So that's great. And yep, a clear winner. How have you done your best when rushed into MVP? When does that ever happen? It happens all the time. Yeah. Anybody? Or Max?
Come on, Max, you go first.
I was thinking about it, and I was having this conversation on a project today, which is I actually think that being time bound and being, if not rushed, pushed to producing and getting something out makes the end result better, because you've got something to achieve and you have to make the hard decisions right away. So I've had it a few times where you've got legislative deadlines in .gov or commitments because technology is going out of date. And at that point, you really are boiling it down to the absolute minimum. And when you go out to user research, you're focusing on, okay, well, not what do people want, but it's the pure needs. How do I absolutely get what you need out there? And so by rushing towards MVP, you can, if done smart and done right and everyone's dedicated, deliver something that is properly, that you are then properly able to build on and improve on. And I think it's a good strategy to have that time bound in. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Well done. It made me think of staying broad. If you have to compromise on depth, because if you maintain a breadth, then at least you'll have taken in something from all the appropriate areas, even though you won't necessarily have got the depth that you'd hoped for. That was my
I like that, Rob, because if you're thinking about what the MVP is and you're thinking about it from a service design perspective, you may not be delivering everything to start off with, but you still need to know what's coming down the line of your roadmap as well. So having that breadth of knowledge and then being able to drill down as you're going is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think from a research point of view, you need to understand what, if you are being pushed to an MVP, what are your key kind of overarching user needs that you need to meet? And if you're not meeting them, is that even a viable MVP to go out with? And I think sometimes being rushed to an MVP can be a good thing, because it makes you focus the brief, it makes you focus on prioritizing which are the key users that you want to go out to first. So you can't be tackling, for example, if it's the NHS, you can't tackle everyone. Who within the NHS do we want to kind of target first? But rushing to an MVP isn't necessarily always a bad thing, even though I'm a researcher and like to do endless research and endless needs gathering. I think it just helps you to be a bit more focused in what you're trying to deliver.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously, we'd all hope that the grown-up in the team, or delivery manager as we call them, would try and have a grown-up conversation with the people who are rushing, but you know, sometimes stuff happens and you have to compromise. That's great.
Yeah, just the final point of that. I mean, let's not forget that what the P in MVP stands for is it's always a product, and it's something you want to test is well, usually, I mean, not always the case, but usually is going to take the form of some sort of deliverable, a prototype of some sort. Let's just go with that. And you know, some methods of producing a prototype are obviously far more time economical than others. And have those conversations sooner rather than later. You know, building a working prototype using the GDS prototyping kit, if you know what you're doing, can be pretty quick and slick. But if you're new to it, have the conversation early on. Say, look, you know, we're going to try something really fast and loose to begin with. Maybe something as simple as even the paper prototype. It's all within the remit of GDS guidelines, by the way. You don't have to use these things. It's recommended that you do, but you know, it's all in the interest of getting the right sort of feedback as quickly as possible. And on that note as well, as designers, you know, try and work as close as you can with your researchers, because you know what we're delivering is only ever going to be as good as the thought that's gone into it, and a lot of that thought comes from our research capability. So you know, to support them as much as you possibly can. Okay. Cheers, don't wait to be invited.
I've had a supplemental from Nick who asks, if being rushed by the client, are they good enough at being able to commit time from their own people? And if not, then what problems does that tend to cause the MVP that is delivered?
I think can I take that? I think that's really interesting, because we always do have time boundaries, really. I mean, you know, we do. And you always try to say to your clients that you know that they'll need to be available, and you'll need to be, you know, this is how we try to work together, and etc. etc. I think, and especially in the past year working remotely, what I've found is that in a way the availability of people has actually been slightly harder in some ways. So it sort of pushed us a little bit to where we might want to sort of start with a very, very clean slate and get people to build the picture up for us. We've probably sometimes had to approach of what do we know, and then put it in front of them and get them to sort of tell us whether we're on the right track or not, whether we've missed things or not, and things like that. That's what I found, especially working remotely. So sometimes it may not be purist sort of behavior, but you have to adapt to, you know, you have to cut your cloth sort of accordingly. So that's what I found. I don't know about anybody else.
So Nick's also added supplemental to his supplemental. Thank you, Nick. Are there any areas that tend to get pushed out of MVP? In the past, I've seen accessibility requirements being deferred. I realize that the client will be looking at you to sort this out.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess from a research perspective, it's normally, like, surprisingly as well in this day and age, it's still the thing that gets cut. Oh, we'll just cut the research and we'll just we'll just build something that's based on assumptions, or maybe based on research that was done in 2019. Or definitely agree with you in terms of accessibility requirements are often kind of deferred from maybe the client perspective. And we really have to kind of take that on and go back to them and say, no, we really need to make sure we're doing this. We've had situations in the past where obviously you will fail a GDS assessment if you've not passed the accessibility requirements. So as a consultant, we have to make sure the client is aware how to pass the GDS assessment. And one of those criteria is to make sure that we test all accessibility needs on that MVP. So yeah, I definitely agree. It's one of the things that tends to get cut first.
Yeah.
And I mean, just to add on to that, you know, accessibility isn't just a design concern. It is everyone on the project's concerned, and more specifically, your delivery capability. So your front-end developers, we need to make sure that they're clued in enough to actually do this stuff on day one. I've recently come up a project where a lot of the accessibility stuff was retrofitted after the first release as a result of having some rather less than favorable feedback on the GDS assessment. So, you know, you're going to have to do it. So why not just start doing it day one? And these are the conversations. I think you just need to have them sooner rather than later. Leaving them till 3-4 months hence, you know, you're going to have a bad time. So yeah, important conversation to have early on.
Yeah, very much so. Definitely something to, you know, put onto the risk register of the project and really bring it into their face.
I think you can weave that in as well, though, in your approach to what you're doing into even into your Jira tickets or your sprint planning. Is if everybody's got the end goal, which is to pass your GDS assessment, and it includes accessibility and things, if you keep focusing on it throughout the work that you're doing, you can get there more easily than having to even just get to, you know, getting to the end of the piece of work and thinking, oh gosh, now what have we got to do to pass the GDS? You know, we are all, in the way we work and the amount of work we've done, we're all pretty focused from the onset of how to approach a project to make sure we do pass GDS. So it's just sometimes bringing other colleagues sometimes and clients along with you.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, Rebecca. Thanks, mate. Just on that point, you know, making sure that you have well-established design, sort of guiding design principles is hugely important, because you can then work those into the acceptance criteria of a ticket, for instance. You know, our GDS is very clear about you know, the services need to be accessible, and if as long as you're sort of making that part of your sort of guiding light as you continue, and that's all mutually agreed upon between ourselves and with the client. It's hugely useful, because again, all of this is in service of avoiding having awkward conversations 3 months down the line. Sorry, Rebecca, I'm done. Thanks.
No, yeah, I agree. I was just going to add, maybe it's about making the client realise that it's more than just about passing a GDS assessment. So I think what I've tried to do with clients in the past with other researchers and content designers and service designers and the rest of this team is really take the client on a journey to understand the value and importance of accessibility requirements and why we need to make sure an MVP it meets those requirements. So we've done things in the past, and I know Paul's on the call, he's done lots of things in Nottingham, but trying to make people aware of different types of accessibility needs that exist and not just permanent ones, but temporary ones. So what happened if you broke your arm? Could you still use that app? And making it feel real to the client actually gets you in a better place in terms of being able to do that research and making sure that those requirements are met in that MVP.
Lovely. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, although it does remind me of me asking a driving test examiner if I could take a picture of his hand because he'd fallen over and broken his thumb, and he was a bit, are you sure? Yes, no, I totally want that picture in my slide deck. So our next question, what does a GDS assessment look like, both successful and unsuccessful? So I'm going to start that. A good one, a successful one, looks like a really well-told story that interweaves all of our disciplines together to validate, cross-validate, reinforce and stimulate each other, and to show GDS that we've really thought about it from every angle and taking it back to the user and brought it back to the business, and showed our learning and growth and taken them on a real journey. That's what a good one looks like. A bad one looks like, we have an assessment soon. Let's put together a slide deck.
Yeah. I mean, another thing to consider as well, and Rob's absolutely right, you know what I mean? I've only been through 2 in my life, and I'm by no means a dab hand at any of this, and I've failed to, and subsequently pass them based upon the feedback. But take the feedback to heart. There's extraordinarily useful exercises, to be honest with you, and you can learn so much from them as designers. And the people that actually do the assessments know their stuff. They're not just randos who happen to be there trying to catch you out. These are very knowledgeable, established professionals. Majority of them, I think, I could be corrected here, but I think are civil servants usually within GDS who have a level of authority. And yeah, use it as a learning experience. The chances are you probably won't pass your first one. But also bear in mind that the assessment isn't just about the design. It's about showing that you've done, and Rebecca will back me up here, but you've done the research, you've learned from your research, you've taken that research and you've fed it into your designs, and this is, based upon what we've learned, this is how we've improved. But I think there's also a sort of technical part to it as well, which I'm not sure anyone on this call is necessarily well positioned to opine upon. Rob, you might know a thing or two about that. But it's around sort of information security and all sorts of stuff like that, which is also equally important.
It is. It's done primarily on a phone call before the mass assessment, but then we drag the technical person along to the assessment anyhow, and for once they don't get to say much, which is quite nice, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think a good assessment, I think going into your assessment feeling like, well, one, you may have had some pre-sessions, you'll obviously have had pre-sessions amongst your own team. You may have had a check-in with somebody else who's done a GDS assessment if it's your first time. Max and I did that at one point, and that was really helpful because it just made me focus on a couple of bits that I could tell a better story about. You hopefully, maybe somebody within the department will have sort of had some GDS check-ins with you. They often have their own people who are sort of watching projects progress. So if you go in, it's a bit like going in to an extent for an exam and you feel that you're well prepared and you've done all the reading and you've done, et cetera, that you will go in there feeling pretty confident you're going to pass. And I totally agree with Russ's point. I mean, where somebody picks up an odd point or an odd question, I write them down and think, oh, I remember that. I'll do that next time I'm doing something. I'll sort of have a list of things I sort of keep thinking, oh, next time when I'm planning and doing, I'll do, I'll be prepared for it. I haven't had an unsuccessful one, but I haven't done that many. So I haven't had an unsuccessful one yet.
Lovely. And the only thing I would add finally to that is good projects will engage GDS early. I mean, we've taken GDS assessors out into the chase cars on the M1 speeding after illegally loaded lorries in order to show them what the work was so that they really understood what we'd done when it came to the assessment. Jill's asked a little supplemental. Thank you, Jill. In an assessment, how would you frame a project decision which is ultimately based on client budget / business needs and not necessarily informed by the research narrative? Is this acceptable to acknowledge and mitigate it as best you can? So do you say, we did the best, but they've made us not do the right thing?
I think you're allowed to say it's they because you're part of the team.
Yeah.
So it's never they, it's we've made this decision and acknowledged it. And I think the first thing you need to do is research the impact. So if you're going down that route, research the impact and say this actually, the impact on the users is small or big or on this particular service assessment. But the other side, client budget is a part of GDS. And if it's unaffordable to go down one particular route, then it's acceptable to go down a route that is affordable and justifiable, as long as it still meets that base user need. It might not have tested as well, but I think it's just about reframing it around what you can actually do and what the art of the possible is. And then ultimately being honest, I think like these guys, the GDS teams are there to help you. Your honesty allows them to pressurize the budget holders. And that's something that's right to do. Like, through GDS, you can pressurize the policymakers and budget holders, and it might not be what your service owner thinks they've got the time for, going back to the MVP question, but it can be the right thing to do longer term.
Yeah.
I mean, a far more egregious sin would be to try and get away with it, or not call it out at all, and then be found wanting. Just to echo what Max said, just be upfront. These assessments aren't here to catch you out. They exist to deliver good, usable, workable services for the millions and millions of people that will end up using them one day. And it's all in the interest of that. And that's something that I think we should all be enthused about.
And it's important to realize that at the assessment, the product owner will come from the client. And so they are up there presenting this work, presenting the need, presenting the context. Right, let's move on to the next question. Do you feel limited using GDS?
No.
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 No. I think you're more limited in the private sector because you've got money and capitalism at the heart of your decisions. And that limits you in how well you can meet user needs. And as designers and user-centered designers, which is the best way to deliver, that is a strong motivation to do the right thing. And when you start bringing in monetary concerns and how we profit off of this, I think that limits you a little bit more. There are strictures, I think, within GDS about how you operate, but they are all guidelines, and the specifics can be challenged if you engage with the community. So I've got a very bullish and positive nature about it. So that's my answer.
I think it can actually be the opposite. It actually helps from a research point of view. You can use it for clients that might not be very pro-research or might not have very high UX maturity. They're not really aware of what they need to do to build a user-centered product. You can actually use it in your advantage in those instances and say, look, we need to do it this way. We need to understand the user needs and build off the user needs with this money that we've got from GDS, because that will get us in the right place to pass the assessment.
Absolutely. By contrast, I think we've all worked for private sector clients as much as we have for GovUK ones, because we are a consultancy and that's the nature of the beast. But what chews up the most time, I think, at least, with a lot of private sector clients I've worked with, is having the sorts of conversations, trying to justify the sorts of things that are actually baked into the GDS delivery platform. So you don't have to, I'm not going to mention any names, but I distinctly remember having a 4-week-long conversation about why perhaps this point of sale application that we were designing for a popular high street retailer should perhaps include a level of accessibility. It was 4 weeks wasted. That's not time well spent at all. Full disclosure, we actually ended up using the GovUK documentation to actually sort of hammer home why this stuff's important. And we won. So it's bear in mind that it's one of the later questions, and it sort of dovetails into that a bit. But this documentation that exists is all open source and free to use, and is good, and is wonderful for winning arguments with difficult people.
Excellent.
I think,
and actually, I might as well just move straight into the companion question, which is: do you transfer GDS principles to the private sector? Yes. Yes is the short answer. You'd be a fool not to. But again, it's whilst a lot of this stuff has become the sort of de facto best practice, the good thing about it is there was a glut of research to back it up as well. You don't have to go off and do all that homework again. It's like, here you go, here it is. It's all been proven. Honestly, ask a room full of stakeholders. When last did you apply for your car tax? How long did it take you? It was easy, wasn't it? Yes, and these are the reasons why. So again, GovUK isn't the only place that's doing this. There's plenty of governments around the world who have similar design system platforms, delivery platforms.
Yeah,
and they're all equally useful.
I think, especially from a content point of view, but I mean, just, having a global experience language, having that within an organization could take a long time to establish that. I've worked in, private sector and thinking about your brand, etc., and how that appears, thinking about your global experience language. Having something like this as a foundation for a lot of organisations, or to introduce it to people and explain the benefits of it, are really important. But I mean, if I just take content for as an example, and you look at the principles around content, around sort of them being, easy to read, scannable, all the sort of things that you need to sort of make online content accessible for people. Well, you can always apply your brand to that. You can apply your tone of voice to those principles, but they're all very, very good, solid foundations to build any product or service on, from my opinion. And I think lots of organizations would benefit by referring to that if they don't have, especially their own sort of set of guidelines to refer to.
Okay. Another interesting point, I'm sorry I'm waffling on a bit, but is, again, the private sector, a lot of these sort of the digital brand, such as it is often dictated by a marketing collateral and print and all that sort of useful stuff, don't get me wrong, but none of it is generally suitable for online or sort of screen deployment, for want of a better word, and it's usually because it's hugely inaccessible. So this is a great way to start having those conversations, and actually you find yourself, by having these conversations, you can actually change quite a lot in an organization. You can make, I mean, we have had influence over the sort of the entire digital brand of this client, who shall remain unnamed, with a view to making all their entire design system accessible, which it wasn't previously, because they've just taken a bunch of CMYK colors to click the old convert button in Photoshop. But yeah.
So if I could also just jump in to flip it round and think about the approach that they take. So in terms of the staging, you've got your discovery, alpha, beta, and live. Within discovery, one of the most important things to do is understand the policy intent. And when you go into the private sector, historically, it's all been about the product and the commercial value of that. And so this drive that they do have to understand and talk to a customer and try and understand what you're actually delivering, like with a mortgage, what am I actually delivering? I'm delivering a house. They're not, their mindset and approach isn't yet in a place what the discovery approach allows you to do, which is to dive into the why beyond the money-making kind of intent that sits at the top of a private sector company. And I think that approach and way of thinking, what is the intent behind what we're doing in this, abstracted from money, is a really useful approach and a really useful way of thinking to push, user-centered design in the private sector.
Excellent. Nick's asked a challenging question. Thank you, Nick. He says, GDS limitations. What would each of you say are one or two ways in which GDS principles could be improved? And I'm going to go first, just in case anybody steals the one I've thought of. For me, GDS was predicated on services to the general public, and therefore they have a characteristic walk up and use, no knowledge, no prior knowledge assumption behind them. And we are increasingly working with highly professional, skilled niche audiences with long training and a depth of domain knowledge, which GDS doesn't really speak to. So I would very much like a little fork in their service standards to deal with this very, very different kind of population. That would be my vote.
I think similar to what you've said is a challenge I've been facing on some recent projects, which is GDS is built around transactional services. I've got a need and I'm going to meet it. Increasingly with personalization, collecting data and the power that brings. Not all services are transactional anymore. You're getting relationship-driven dashboards that drive you towards ongoing action that don't have a beginning and an end. And the service standards aren't built around that or tested around that sort of relationship. So it couples Rob's point and kind of takes further, which is as Gov gets, I think they've got a new strategy, which is we want to be personalized. Well, what does that mean for the GDS standards? Because it's no longer about a beginning and an end. It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah. Rebecca, I don't know if you've...
This is an interesting one because I really like the GDS principles, and I'm just trying to think how could it be better. I think sometimes GDS goes on about obviously meeting the needs for everyone, and I sometimes don't think that that is an achievable goal, depending on what the client is that you're working with and what the particular service is. Sometimes you just can't meet the needs of everyone with every disability in every service, and sometimes those particular people might not even use that in that way, or in that channel, in that digital channel. They might want a different way, like over the telephone or paper service. GDS is quite digital first, so it doesn't really take into, in my opinion, it's quite broad in the user kind of way that it's talking. But yeah, that's a really interesting question. That's probably the only improvement I would say.
I think I'm with you on that as well, because depending on what, sometimes where you've got sort of, especially through the assessment, you've got sort of a proven the things that you've done and things. It's maybe difficult to say that that bit doesn't need proving. Something doesn't need proving because it's not possibly relevant. But I mean, you'd obviously have to have your evidence to say that. But I think definitely agree that where you've got, and it does depend, we talk about levels of digital literacy and things, but I think Rob alluded to this, that you can be working with people who are users within the service, so they might be delivering the service, who know how to do what they know how to do because they've been doing it a long time, versus users sort of who are accessing the service who maybe don't know what they're trying to. So it's maybe to be able to break it down a little bit further sometimes to make sure that you're hitting the right need, the right requirements for different user needs is something I might want to improve.
Yeah, and from a sort of design perspective, the sort of like, for instance, the NHS digital guidelines, as Max pointed out, generally they've been designed and have been built and for deployment for sort of very stepped journeys, where it's you fill in this bit of information, you click a button, and it's one question per page, and that's absolutely fine and valid for journeys of that nature. It tends to fall apart a bit when, again, what Max said, when you have sort of systems where it is just one page and data is being sorted on that depending on a bunch of criteria that you've thrown at it. We recently built a check-in system for the NHS, for the emergency departments, and one of our assessments said, oh, every page has to have an H1 on it. Well, sure, but that means that all this super useful information is going to be shoved 2 feet down the page. No one's going to be able to see it. So with that in mind, it is also worth understanding that you can challenge these things. It has been mentioned previously. There is a level of zealotry sometimes you'll come up against, but it's few and far between, and it is perfectly acceptable to sort of say, well, look, we understand the reasoning why this is a requirement, but given these criteria, we have made a choice to diversify and divert slightly from what the prescription is, and is that okay? And generally, the answer is yes.
Okay. Next question: are there any .gov failures that are good learning stories?
That depends. They've got failures that have had GDS put across them, or they've got things that are there that probably need reworking. I'm sure there are failures.
So I guess there's different failures. So there's failing your assessment, that's one failure. There's having a cunning idea that you want to introduce as a service and having that rejected, which I've done. I've killed a service. And then there's things that went all the way through and still weren't very good. So obviously there's been some issues around the pandemic for some of the services introduced in a great hurry that have turned out to be not very good. Killing off services is great. So our client, DVSA, wanted intelligence about what garages might have been doing dodgy MOT tests so that they could direct their limited investigatory force to those ones. So they wanted members of the public to, or other garages, to fill in a form. It's just a simple form, Rob. Fill in a simple form and say what was wrong. But when we did research, we found that the mental model of the public was completely different. They felt that they were reporting a crime, and they expected this crime to be fully reported and investigated and come through at the end of it. So there was a complete mismatch of mental models going on. So I said, you can't have your simple form. It's just not going to work, which was a great spur for innovation, because they went off with some of our data engineers and developed an AI solution that looked for unusual patterns in the data behavior from all the thousands of MOT tests, and used that very successfully to guide their investigation team instead. So it was a bad idea, but it was great that it got killed off.
Yeah, that's a good example, I think, Rob. I think generally failing, surely you learn from failing. So sometimes in the past that we might have failed a GDS assessment for a particular reason, and then you learn, okay, well, what do we need to do to be better? What do we need to do next time? Next time I go into a different client, I'm going to make sure that I do it this way, because otherwise it's going to fail GDS. And I think potentially some of the failures that have happened are not meeting accessibility needs, or not having time to do accessibility research in the time that you've been given so far. So that then makes you think, okay, well, next time we need to think about accessibility needs right from the beginning, like what Russell said earlier. This is not just about the assessment, it's about the process, the GDS process from start to end, not just thinking about, okay, what do we need to do to pass the assessment? So I think sometimes failing some of the GDS assessments can be a good thing, makes you learn.
I mean, honestly, if you're not failing, you're not paying close enough attention, to be honest with you. If you think everything's going swimmingly, it probably isn't, and you might need to go back and have another look. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, without failure, it sounds corny, but trite, but you don't really learn anything, do you? So yeah, what's important is that you have the structures in place to identify failure and identify where things have gone wrong, because if you don't, you're going to think you're doing a great, fantastic, bang-up job, when meanwhile back at the dojo, you've got users who are floundering. So yeah, fail away.
It might make you realize something that you didn't know, or the team didn't know. Sometimes when you get to the end of a GDS assessment, they will actually give you pointers. We're going to pass you with the caveat of you're going to go away and do this by this date. So it sometimes helps to flesh out that roadmap further, and what you need to do to reach that MVP and pass next time.
Yeah.
And are there any things that you learned from your individual failures that you roll on to the next project?
Discovery is the most important phase.
Yeah.
And if you rush it, or you don't plan it right, or you don't be clear enough about what you've discovered, your whole alpha and beta will have little niggles and issues. And if you're gonna try your hardest in any phase, and we obviously try our hardest in every phase, try your hardest in discovery. Overload your workload. Make it. That's the thing I always come back to. Discovery is key.
And also the brief in the first place. If you don't think it's right, I mean, I think Rob and I worked on a project where we weren't sure the brief was quite right. And I've been on, other projects since then where I've not thought the brief is quite right. And I think feeling as consultants that we can go back and say, we're looking at your brief, we understand why it is like that, but really we would like to try and broaden it, or, to consider this part as well. Because I think if the brief's wrong, then the discovery is never, well, if it's limited, then it's not going to be right, because they're ultimately not total discovery, is it? So I think feeling able to challenge briefs or the way things are set up or whatever is really important to set yourself up for success. Because sometimes, you know, clients don't know what it is that they need or what they want. Well, they may know what they want, but it isn't actually what they need. So I think it's our job to be able to help them get to that right place where we can.
Yeah, they can become a bit, it's confirmation bias. They get a bit fixated onto the solution they've come up with. Yeah, you've reminded me, Leo, of the client we worked. They felt they were delivering a specialist piece of software for the staff, and that therefore we wouldn't need to necessarily bother with any research to the service users. We did some, well, I say we only did some by being brazen and just going up to people and talking to them, doing some guerrilla research just for our own context. And they were, you know, mightily slated when they did come to assessment that they didn't do this, and were thankful for the small amount of unofficial testing that we'd actually done.
Mm.
And again, from design, it's a quick one is just make sure you have a very strong working relationship with your delivery team as well. And make sure you are part of that delivery team. Make sure that, you know, all the ceremonies that they have, the sprint planning, the retros, all that business. Make sure that you as a designer and as a researcher and whoever you are, even if you have to make a bit of a nuisance of yourself, just make sure you're part of that chat. Because, you know, again, a lot of the quality assurance will probably end up being done by you if you're a designer. You know, you're the one that knows where stuff needs to be on the screen, and who's best positioned than you to make sure that it's you know, pixel perfect.
Okay,
And,
I'm going to do one final question, just a quickie, mainly because one person's going to answer it. How do you do field research during a pandemic, Rebecca?
Oh, the $1 million question. Yeah, this is a good one. It's been a challenge throughout the last year because obviously the nature of research has changed. So I've gone from, as you've seen in my bio, sitting in doctor's surgeries waiting to speak to people, to now sitting here in my dining room trying to speak to these people. And it's been a challenge because I guess you can't really replicate it during the coronavirus pandemic. In like a face-to-face sense. What we've been doing is obviously having remote sessions with people. We've been having remote workshops. We've been sharing our screens, showing prototypes that way, having telephone conversations, having kind of interactive sessions where we're using Miro boards to kind of ideate and create different prototypes and different ideas with users. But it has been a challenge, and I don't think it's something that you can fully replicate the in-person contact, and it's difficult. We've had challenges with, obviously, some people don't want to put their webcam on, so you're missing out on the characteristics and their expressions, and you're missing out on a lot of that human kind of interaction that tells you a lot about user needs, about how someone's feeling, about what someone's thinking. Sometimes people say things and actually you can tell by their body language and their expressions that they mean something different. So I guess it's just made research a lot harder. And yeah, I guess my advice is just to be even more kind of detailed in your script writing, making sure that you're getting to the detail that you need, because you can't always now pick that up over a screen. I don't know if anyone's got anything else to add, Leo, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the hardest thing is those visual cues that you're missing out on, whether you walk into an office or a hospital ward or a you know, an office department where somebody's got post-it notes sort of stuck around, and you think, oh, that's a funny thing there. That what's that for? And they say, oh, well, that's because if we don't press, you know, return on the computer, it forgets to save it or something. You know, these things are where you find the pain points as well. So screen sharing as much as possible, or even if people can share potentially artifacts with you and things like that, that can help. And you can say, take me through your process, or take me through what you do on a daily basis and things. But you do miss those really good visual cues that you get just by proximity. Absolutely.
And watching
I mean,
go through that process as well, watching them go through, like when we did the NHS research, I was watching GPs using particular software, or I was watching them, and the parts that aren't necessarily digital, so they might do something with the software and then they might go and dispense some medication, or they might go and run across to the receptionist and say something. It's those extra bits in that user journey that we're missing out on, and we're kind of relying on their recall of their experience, which obviously is biased.
Yeah.
One of the things I have
Lovely.
found it's slightly easier to do is, just a quick one, is because it's all remote, it's far easier to sort of loop in, I don't know, a dev or a tester or a project manager or a delivery manager into a research session, because it's just dialing into a Zoom call. It's not like they've got to go anywhere. So we've done that a few times, and it's been super helpful, you know, giving delivery people a taste and a perspective of what exactly it is we're building and why we're building it. Is never time poorly spent.
Great stuff. So just to wrap up, so first of all, thank you for the questions, and thank you for the answers. We are having a prize draw to win some free consultancy. We need 100 words as to why this would be helpful to you, and then we'll have a little prize draw to make sure that a suitable person can have a day's consultancy, which I think is quite fun. Sounds actually great to deliver, actually. And finally, I can advance the slide. We are recruiting. We've grown a lot during this pandemic. There's been a lot of work to do, and we are still ambitious for growth, particularly in Manchester. So if you're interested in joining us, we have vacancies across all of the disciplines that GDS covers. So have a look at our webpage and have a think about it. And that's it from us. Thank you so very much for coming along and listening to us. And hope to see you on Friday, where there's a service design takeaway session for you to enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
everybody.